Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Abdul Wahid. You are most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Paul, and to all the viewers today.
Yes, great to see you again. For those who don't know, Abdul Wahid has been active in Muslim affairs in the UK for over 25 years, discussing Islam, political issues, the Caliphate, Palestine, and more besides. He's been published on the websites of 5 Pillars, Islam 21C, Foreign Policy, Open Democracy, and the Times Higher Educational Supplement, and Prospect Magazine. And he's also a regular guest on Blogging Theology. Now, there's a great deal unfolding in the news right now that warrants serious reflection and discussion, and hence our podcast today. I'll just very, very briefly list some of the topics we will be covering, inshallah. Firstly, the ongoing mass starvation of Palestinians in Gaza. Second, we're going to look at a post actually you shared on X about Belgium's defense and foreign trade minister visiting Ankara, where he was photographed kneeling at the mausoleum of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, which quite prompted you to respond. The third thing we're going to look at is a recent headline in the Telegraph, which really stood out. Half the public think Islam not compatible with British values, it said. So I'll show the front page of that, invite you to comment on this interesting article. And lastly, a BBC report, which you tweeted about as well, the most popular name for children born in England and Wales in 2024, that's been released, and the most popular boy's name for the second year running is Mohammed. So extraordinary. So we'll look at that briefly at the end as well. So coming back to more serious matters, the ongoing mass starvation of Palestinians in Gaza. Now, you wrote an article in Islam 21C very recently, and I'll just pop it up on the screen so we can all see what you wrote. There we are, UK enabling genocide in Gaza via empty words and bloody hands. So why did you feel motivated to write this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. We've all been watching the horrors of the last 22 months and more. And then in the last week, we've had first British Foreign Secretary David Lammy criticizing Israel and saying that they have to open up avenues to aid where people don't end up queuing for food at 4 sites where they get shot. With this aid scheme run by this shadowy organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And following that, a few days later, Keir Starmer coming out with a statement saying that unless Israel did a few things in the next few weeks, Britain, alongside France, will be recognizing the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly in September. And this created a lot of noise. And I wrote 2 articles, one Islam 21C very kindly published, and another on my own Substack blog, which were critical of the British government statements, because I think they are dishonest, I think they're arrogant, I think they're a distraction, and I think people need to be made more aware of these dangerous statements. In particular, I would like people to be aware of what this 2-state solution, this state of Palestine that keeps being promised for the last 7 decades, what it actually is. It's arrogant because, I mean, Starmer standing up, and it's as if it's in his gift to grant Palestinians statehood. And even that is conditional upon their occupiers doing 1, 2, and 3, or not doing 1, 2, and 3. And this is humiliation, frankly, for the Palestinian people. It's a distraction because all of us are seeing these horrific images of starving people, particularly starving children, deliberately being starved, hearing these horrific stories about the aid system that has been introduced in the last few weeks by, as I said, this organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is like ex-military contractors from America who are very, very pro-Israel, bringing all the aid into like 400 aid points where people can come to, and when people are coming to them, they're being shot. And in the middle of all that, Starmer is not focusing on that. He's pointing people's gaze somewhere else. He's literally saying, "Oh, you know, don't look at this. Look at this thing that we're going to recognize at some time in the future, which is not even well defined at the moment, that doesn't actually exist, and which relies on the United States and Israel, the Zionist occupation, to play ball." It just seems a nonsense that we let ourselves be distracted by that.
Can I just interrupt? Is it not arguably the case that the reason why he's saying this and saying it now is because Macron, the president of France, declared that by September France would recognize a Palestinian state, and now Canada has followed suit, and other countries. I think New Zealand. There's been a kind of trickle of people, mainly Western countries, who have come out and said, is he not kind of joining on the bandwagon, and so as not to be left out of this, you know, not to let France, you know, be there first? Well, we're going to be recognizing it too by September if these certain caveats are acknowledged, of course. Do you think maybe that's the context?
That is the context, in the sense that Macron said it first, and so Starmer doesn't want to be left behind. But at the same time, what they are all doing, whether it is Macron, Starmer, or the Canadians, or anyone else who joins in this, is talking about something which is really not going to feed a single mouth in Gaza as we speak. It's at most, it's a gesture. It's sending a symbolic message at a time where you need concrete actions. And let me put it this way, Paul. Let's say Britain is doing this symbolic gesture to recognize a state of Palestine, and at the same time, it is not doing the following, which it can do. It is not suspending all arms licenses to Israel, which includes components for American-made F-35 fighter jets, which have been used in Gaza to kill people. It is not stopping its reconnaissance flights, which the RAF flies out of Cyprus and provides the Israelis with intelligence, which they're using in Gaza. It is not putting sanctions on the political and military leadership in a way that would send a message to them that they have become a pariah state in the world. It's put sanctions on people like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, two ministers in the government. Britain has put personal sanctions on them, somewhat limited, but personal sanctions in their individual capacity. And yet these two, amongst others, have made genocidal statements in their capacity as ministers in an administration. And we know that the ICC has issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister. And yet Britain, which supposedly supports the ICC, has not said it is going to enforce those arrest warrants. It has not suspended all trade with Israel, with the Zionist occupier. It's just said it's suspended future trade negotiations. It has not halted arms purchases from Israel. It has not stopped military cooperation where Israeli officers come over to the UK and have joint training with Britain. It has not enforced its own laws in Britain. There's a law in Britain called the Foreign Enlistment Act of 1870, which prohibits British citizens from fighting in wars overseas. In particular, the Israeli occupying force is up to its neck in allegations of war crimes, And some of those people may be British citizens coming back here. It has not used that act from 1870, nor more recent counter-terrorism legislation, which would be absolutely appropriate to use. So there are all these things that Britain could do, and more than that, and yet it hasn't. Rather, it's decided to make a very symbolic gesture sometime in the future, and between now and that time in the future, we have rhetoric. That is where the dishonesty of this comes in.
Now, you're against the two-state solution on principle, aren't you? It's not something. It's not because it's been failed to work. But you're against it anyway. So, why are you against it, and what is your alternative solution?
I'm against it both politically and Islamically. So Islamically, I think that the simplest way to put it is, imagine you are from a Palestinian family and you owned a house or land in what is now occupied Palestine, which is now Israel, and it's been stolen by a family. And some person, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's the United States, whether it's the Palestinian Authority leadership itself, whether it's the Arab League coming together, somebody says at some time in the future, well, that is officially, we are saying, that is no longer yours. That land that was stolen has now been taken away from you, and it's going to be somebody else's forever and tough. Nobody, no authority has the right to do that, to steal somebody else's land and give it to a usurper. And we know that Sultan Abdul Hamid, the last Khalifa of the Muslims, when he was asked even to sell some of the land of Palestine, which was not inhabited, he refused to do that because it was not, in his view, it was not his land to give away. When that land was opened by the Sahaba and those that followed them, it was not for people, for us, centuries later to give that away. That's the Islamic argument. The political argument is, what is a two-state solution? The two-state solution is basically a carrot that Western powers dangle in front of pro-Palestine people every now and then, to make them feel that the West is still engaged in some way, that in the future it will back some kind of justice for the Palestinians. But that two states will be, for the Palestinians, their state will be on less than 20% of what is currently historic Palestine. It would be divided between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The West Bank itself would be like an archipelago of small enclaves of Palestinian land surrounded by Israeli settlers. So this Palestinian state will not be a continuous state where you can just drive from one area to the other. It'll be these little islands, balkanized islands, very vulnerable because surrounded by their occupiers, and they won't be allowed to have a military. It'll be a demilitarized state. They will be absolutely at the mercy of their occupiers for resources, for water, for energy, for food coming from outside, for trade. It will be one where one of the conditions the Israelis has put is that the leadership must be very compliant. So it has to be a puppet leadership. What kind of state is this? Paul, I shared a map on one of my articles, which is a very well-known map. Can you possibly share that with our audience?
It is up now. Can you not see it?
Yeah. So even if you look at the second image from the left, this is, of course, the 1948 UN partition plan. So the green areas would have been Palestine, and the white areas would have been Israel. To me, this is a nonsense. You've got, neither side is going to have any kind of a state which is a viable state with that kind of shape. And more than that, just the historic injustice of this, that the white areas on that second image were green, in 1947 and prior to that. So you're literally talking about just giving away whole half of Palestine in 1948. And then if you look at the image on the far right, at what has become of the West Bank. And that's what I mean by this kind of archipelago, this balkanized state. This is not a viable state. This is less viable than Lebanon is on its own. Yeah? So this is nothing to be promising people in terms of justice and dignity. And I think the more people realize that when they hear this two-state solution or a state of Palestine, it is really not in the interests of the Palestinian people. It is absolutely not. Nobody who really cares about the interests of the Palestinian people would be arguing that that image on the right, were it to be enshrined in international law as the state of Palestine, that would be a good thing for them. Nobody could really believe that, I don't think.
Okay. Well, if you're ready, we can move on to the next news item, if you can call it that, which is slightly a very different kind of news item. I just put the tweet up that you mentioned. Here we go. Yeah, can you see that? Yeah. So,
yes.
So there's a picture here. Here we have the minister kneeling in front of Ataturk's mausoleum, very reverently paying homage. Why did that upset you so much?
Well, I mean, I'm smiling as I'm looking at that now. I mean, there's so many sort of nonsensical things about this. This man, Theo Franken, actually, the irony of this is I looked up what Theo means. And do you know what Theo means?
Theo is the Greek word, means God.
Apparently, Theos is the Greek word for God. And Theo is short for Theodorus, which means God's gift.
Oh, I see.
So God's gift Franken is the Belgian trade minister. He has a bit of history, this man. He's seen as somebody who's anti-immigrant, anti-Islam, and he has a reputation for this in Belgium and in Europe. So this guy basically goes to visit Turkey, and when he goes to Turkey, as do many diplomats from around the world, they go to the tomb of Mustafa Kemal, the founder of the Turkish Republic, who abolished the Islamic Khilafah. And in this extraordinary gesture, he bends his knee in front of this tomb.
This can't be normal protocol for diplomats to do obeisance like this before the tomb, I would imagine. Are you saying this is some extraordinary gesture he's making?
Oh, I think it is. I think they often go and they often sign a book, and they right. even ministers and dignitaries from the Muslim world go and they'll often lay a wreath. But I don't think I've ever seen an image of anyone paying homage like this.
No,
in his statement, when he was asked about this afterwards, he said, well, Ataturk, which is the title they gave to Mustafa Kemal, the founder of the Turks, strongly advocated for reforms and transformed Turkey into a democratic and secular republic. He granted full political rights to women long before many European countries, abolished the caliphate, removed religion from the steering wheel of society, and focused on education, development, and science. I express my deepest respect for this man and his political project by kneeling. I mean, this is such a distorted view of what this man actually did. I mean, he seized power effectively through a coup. He enforced his ideology of Kemalism onto the Turkish people. He didn't just abolish the caliphate, he abolished the adhan being proclaimed publicly. He abolished the Arabic script being used for the Turkish and Ottoman language. He abolished the hijab for women. He abolished Turkish fezzes and insisted that people wear top hats. One of his articles of his political creed of Kemalism was populism. So he believed in a populist authoritarian government in a way that no European country would tolerate in its own country, but they tolerated it from Mustafa Kemal because he used that to try and wipe out every vestige of Islam in the public sphere of Turkey. The big hypocrisy here of this guy, but we can see who his who he has reverence for, and interesting that he even chose to some of these points as explaining why he has so much respect for Mustafa Kemal.
Yeah. Quite extraordinary, incredible photograph, I must say, from a secular European diplomat.
Yes.
Minister. It is very striking. Well, moving on to other matters. Let me just. Okay, so the next item on the agenda that we mentioned is a recent headline in the Telegraph, the UK newspaper, and quite a shocking headline, really. It's a very right-wing paper, of course. Half of the public, the UK public, think Islam not compatible with British values. Recent survey found 4 in 10 polled think Muslim immigrants have a negative impact on the UK. I don't know, when they say Muslim immigrants, do they mean people who've literally just arrived in the UK, or people who have been born here second, third, fourth generation? I suspect they have blurred that line deliberately. There's the survey there, 4 in 10 think Muslim immigrants have negative impact, and then compared to, say, Jewish, 13%, Sikh 14, Hindu 15, and so on. And how UK immigration has skyrocketed, it says, since Brexit, ironically, but it declined rapidly around 2021 or 22, and then it's apparently gone through the roof, according to that anyway, which is interesting. And then they quote, I noticed this guy, Sabah Ahmedi, known as the young imam online. He says he believes fear among people stems from a lack of understanding Islam. Now, this gentleman who I looked up, I thought I guessed who he is. Sunni Muslims, i.e. 90% of the world's Muslims, but not even consider him a Muslim because he's an Ahmadi, part of the Ahmadi sect, and they are not considered to be Muslims by vast majority of Muslims. But they are the only go-to Muslim, the Telegraph, there it says the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. They're the only people that the Telegraph thinks is worth consulting on this issue. So what are your thoughts?
Well, in fairness to the Telegraph on this, it was that sect that commissioned this YouGov poll.
Was it? I didn't know.
Which was done in mid-July. And they sampled a little over 2,000 people, asking if different groups of immigrants generally have a positive or negative impact on the UK. Why anyone would commission a poll asking that question if you were a genuine Muslim and a sincere Muslim, I can't really imagine. It's a very strange question to ask, because it's linking Islam and religion to this very sensitive topic in the UK of migration at the moment. So I think it says a lot about the people that asked for this poll, the question that they chose to ask. That being said, you know what, Paul? When I saw this, I thought to myself, this is a very nasty headline from the Telegraph.
Yes, typical, but it's absolutely typical of the Telegraph. They're constantly almost every day, because I do subscribe, and in my defense, I do this because I want to know what's going on with the very powerful, influential media, because it concerns us all. It really is an Islamophobic rag, and I'm not exaggerating there. They're constantly, giving a very negative slant about Muslims, about people's. Particularly if you speak up for Palestine, that seems to be a sin, an egregious sin, apparently. Appalling paper. And yet there are some interesting, Tim Stanley, I know he's a right-wing Catholic, but he takes a slightly different line, and he can say some interesting things sometimes. But nevertheless, this is the most popular so-called broadsheet of the English press of all, actually. Second only to Daily Mail, which is a tabloid.
And it occurred to me that given that the Telegraph and the Mail and the Express and the Times and the Sun have, for the best part of the last 25 years, been demonizing Islam and Muslims in the UK, and that the British government has spent an awful lot of time and effort in problematizing Islam and Muslims in the UK with various policies. You know what? I thought to myself, 41% said that Muslims have a negative impact, which means 59% didn't say that, which means all that effort that the Telegraph have been making, and the Mail and the UK government and the Times and the Murdoch press generally, hasn't really had as much of an impact as I thought it would probably have.
But does it say, it says just under a quarter, 24% of respondents felt Muslim immigrants had a positive impact on the UK.
A positive impact, yes. Which means that the remaining is what, about 30-something% would be neutral to it, or I don't know.
Right. Yes.
Which, considering, if you consider the negative press that Muslims get over and over again and Islam get over and over again, it's actually not as high as I thought it would be. Right. I'll be honest with you. That was my first thought when I saw this poll. Aside from the fact that I knew the way that the Telegraph was spinning this poll was to create more negative press about Muslims. But actually, when you think about it, 25 years of negative propaganda, and that's what they've got. 41% saying Muslim immigrants have a negative impact. If you'd asked a different question, what do you think of Muslims in the education system or the health service, or et cetera, you might have got different statistics, you might have got different numbers, and you might have got different answers. But they've asked a very problematic question, the people that have commissioned this poll.
Yeah,
this Ahmadiyya community, and they've got a statistic which, as I say, considering, this is my view, other people may be horrified by this figure, but considering the negative press Muslims get universally, I think I was a little surprised that 41% was not higher, especially when framed in this particular way with this question.
Well, the reason I didn't like several reasons I didn't like the article is, okay, we're talking here, it says half of public think Islam not compatible. Okay, so dealing here with global historic faith, comparable to Christianity, comparable, and then what we're talking about are Muslim immigrants to the UK.
Yes.
Now, these are not synonymous; they're not interchangeable issues at all. But Muslim immigrants, and again, what do they mean by immigrants? As I've already asked, do they mean people who've literally been here 5 years or 10 years, or do they mean Muslim youth who are the great grandsons of people who came in the 1950s? Are they also immigrants? In which case, calling them immigrants is absolutely wrong, because these are British citizens, for example.
Yeah.
And so there's an ambiguity, and there's more than half the public think Islam is not compatible. Because of what? Afghan refugees equals Islam, and our experience of large-scale immigration, like we see there, where apparently has rocketed, has something to do with Islam as such. I mean, this conflation and confusion and ambiguity of terms and words, it strikes me as very unjournalistic, unprofessional. They shouldn't be conflating these terms. They are distinct, separate items. Are they not? Yeah. And yet they all mashed up together. I would have to think that's deliberate by the Telegraph, because they're not stupid, and they are deliberately demonizing Islam and Muslims through this kind of propaganda piece, basically.
Yeah, and that isn't a very big surprise. They are demonizing, and the West has had this long-standing section in society that is very always focusing on Islam as a problem, and comparing it to other religions, and there's a reason for this. Migration is meant to be accompanied by a degree of assimilation into the society, and as different groups, whether they're Jewish, Sikh, Hindu, others, come to the UK, what the trend tends to be is, generation by generation, they align more with the dominant values in society. And let's face it, Britain has become an increasingly secular society over the last half century. When I went to school primary school, when I went to primary and secondary school, there were still a significant number of people who would go to church on Sunday, who would go to a Sunday school, who, when they reached their early teens, would go through a confirmation process of confirming, so they were baptized when they were born, they're christened when they were born, but when they reached early teenage years, they went through a confirmation process to affirm their belief in their Christian faith. These were really quite common things in the 1970s and 1980s.
Yes.
And since then, Britain has become increasingly secular. So the trend amongst migrants who come here from other parts of the world is that whatever faith they start with, they often get more and more secular, just in the same way that British society has. They get more and more liberal in the same way that British society has become more liberal. And Muslims bucked that trend, and they find that extremely problematic.
And I just want to say, I spoke to Professor Linda Woodhead, professor of sociology at King's College in London, a year or so ago on BT. People can watch the video, where she just basically said what you said. She looked at the recent census data in terms of religious allegiance and adherence and participation, and it's all going downhill. Everyone, synagogues and churches and so on, except for Muslims, and it's the other way around. And this is what the stats suggest, and we talked about various possible reasons for that. But I do object also in this article with this thing called British values. Now, I'm British, you're British, so we should know what British values are, because, hey, we live here. And to be honest, I actually don't know. Okay, well, we believe in the rule of law. It's a British value. Well, actually, no, it's not. It's a universal value. It's found in many, many different countries. It's found in Islam as well. And by the way, our government's not exactly upholding international law, arguably, at the moment when it comes to Palestine. What are these values? Tolerance. Well, look at the Ottoman Empire. That was a very tolerant, pluralistic empire. I just don't see what's distinctively British, in the sense that it's not, say, French or American, or what we see in the classical Muslim world either. So I'm generally at this reification, or this homogenized idea of British values, a checklist which we can all clearly identify with. Even when it comes to, say, things like LGBT, the Catholic Church's position is the same as Islam's position, essentially. There are many conservative people, traditionalist Catholics, like Tim Stanley in the Telegraph, even, who many of whose values do converge or coincide with Islamic values. So the whole framing of this is not good, in my view.
No, you've identified something that people don't like to talk about, which is what are British values. The reason they don't like to talk about it is because, precisely for the reason you've given, they can't really identify anything authentically as British values. I first noticed this terminology being used shortly after 9/11. This was an era where the internet was not very well developed, so a lot of the stories that I read then, and articles I read then, which were either in magazines, journals, or sometimes online, I used to have a big folder with a lot of clippings and statements that ministers had said, and as the years went by, I lost that material. But I can tell you now, in the era around 9/11, there was this discussion about Muslims in Western societies, and how come it is that these Muslims have sympathy with the people of Afghanistan rather than the British objective of being part of this coalition to invade Afghanistan. And there was a lot of discussion about this, and these reports that think tanks used to come out with, like Civitas in the UK or RAND in the USA, which were trying to identify what it was about Muslims that made them different. And so there was a lot of focus on the aspects of Islam that they thought made them different. And then they were criticizing Western society, saying, you know what, we assumed after the fall of the Berlin Wall that history had ended and that there was no need for any civilizational ideas to be discussed in any kind of meaningful way that brought people together in society. So let's try and identify those things that make us authentically British.
Yeah.
And immediately that they started doing that, you started to get political divisions. So people on the more conservative end of the spectrum, with a small c, identify Britishness as something which was very much rooted in history.
Yes.
The way I was taught history at school was chronological. It was, the Roman conquest of Britain, the Angles and Saxons, the Norman invasion, the Tudors, the Plantagenets, Tudors, Stuarts, the formation of the United Kingdom, the world wars in the 20th century, World War I, World War II. And, an English person whose family had been here for generations, their story was formed out of that story.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what made them British. And a lot of the values that aligned with that, whether they were Christian, whether they were nationalistic or patriotic, whether they were to do with democracy because of the formation of parliament and all these things, and all of that came out of that story.
Yeah.
But then people on the kind of more liberal end of the spectrum or globalist end of the spectrum had a problem with that history, because if you're not white, British, probably Protestant as well, that story really doesn't fit with you. So how do we get a society to coalesce around values where, we've got many people who don't come from that background, whether they're African Caribbean, whether they're from South Asia, whether they're originally Irish, or whether they're from Europe in more recent times. How do you? So then they started to try and identify values like tolerance and democracy and like these kind of things. And so to this day, you'll never find left and right or liberal and conservative with small c's unifying on what are British values. No. And I've always thought this is really interesting because can
I just pause you for a sec. I'm to mind in the 80s and 90s, two key British political figures, hugely influential, Margaret Thatcher and Tony Benn. Now, this is one may not remember them if one's much younger. I mention them is because both of them, in their own very different ways, were very British. I mean, Tony Benn, even though he was left-wing, socialist, Labour Party member, he could identify with the Levellers and the Quakers, and he had this sense of the kind of radical social history of England and going back through trade unions, which is very much rooted in English history. It wasn't, Russian history or anything else. And he wasn't a Marxist either. So he wasn't kind of advocating this kind of revolutionary socialism. And Thatcher, of course, also in her own inimitable way, also drew on to that kind of monetarism and liberalism, or economic liberalism, I mean, and so on. And yet they would not have agreed about British values. As I'm trying to say, that they represented very different strands. Britain is very multifaceted. There are many different contributory thoughts and movements within our history on the left and the right, as you say, both religious and secular. It can't be boiled down to this thing called British values, as if that's something that we could all agree on. It becomes vacuous. We all agree on the rule of law. Well, so do the French, so do the Russians, so do the Americans, so do the Bolivians. Everyone does. This is not a British value at all. So I'm just remembering, it's just a very empty slogan, really, that doesn't impress.
And isn't it interesting? Because I think a lot of when I've thought about this values debate over the last 25 years, when I think of myself as a Muslim, if you come to values, whether you come to values from the point of view of your history, your story, or whether you come to values from the point of view of principles, actually, as Muslims, number one, these two are really very much in harmony. They're not in opposition, which often you find the discussion about values in secular societies. They're often in opposition. The story is often in opposition to the values that they profess to believe in that come from the Enlightenment, for example. And with us, the values which come from the Quran and the Sunnah, the principles that we uphold and believe in, very much align with the story that comes to us. And number two, isn't it amazing that you and I, from very different backgrounds, well, actually, we share a story. We share a common story that starts from the Prophet Adam alayhi salam, going through the prophets mentioned in the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, and the Islamic history and the great figures of Islam that have come in the world, and all the ups and downs we've seen, particularly in the last century. That is your story and my story. And the values that we believe in, they're universal because they belong to you and me and everybody else who identifies as a Muslim. The goodness that we know from the Quran and the example and the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I've always found that a really amazing thing for me as a Muslim. And frankly, it doesn't matter where you live then. If I live in Britain or if I live in Pakistan, I actually uphold those values wherever I happen to be. And if there are people in a country like Pakistan that want to try and forge a national identity which alienates Pakistan from its neighbor, Afghanistan, or from any other Muslims in the world, I can't buy into that, because my principles as a Muslim are cross national borders. So I think we're very well placed, and that's one reason I think Muslims have bucked the trend, because if you really didn't believe in this faith, why would you choose it with all the hassle that goes with it? We live in a world where your average Muslim is forced to think to themselves in some way, why do I believe? What do I believe in? Why do I believe in it? And in some way, even in some very simplistic way, every Muslim who professes to be a Muslim has decided, well, I do believe in some basic things which identify me as a Muslim, and I'm going to take all the hassle that I get in this society for believing in that, and I'm going to carry on believing in that, and actually I'm going to learn more about this faith, and I'm going to practice more. And we bucked the trend. And I don't think that's a problem. I think it brings a lot of goodness to the society if we live by the values that we're supposed to live by. Actually, we'd be a great asset to any society. So
there are many values we have in common as Muslims living in the West. We all believe in justice. Both Islam and Western legal traditions, at least in theory, value fairness and justice, law and order, human dignity. We all have an interest in having good schools, in having decent public services, in having good homes. And family values, huge stress on family values in Islam, which is the envy of many other people who have lost that connectivity and that family-centered lifestyle. Christians have lost it. Many secular Jews have lost it as well. So there are positive things as well that Islam embodies or expresses as well. And there are differences, of course. We don't idolize personal autonomy. We don't think that's the ultimate moral good. We believe in submission to God, but that's also found in the Christian tradition. It's very much there in the Bible, of course, all over the place. So it shouldn't be alien to Christians. And there are, we don't drink alcohol and so on. But there used to be a great temperance movement in the Christian church as well, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. That's almost disappeared now, but it was a huge force in Britain and in the United States. Temperance movement against alcohol. It was a great evil. It destroyed families. Women got abused. Men lost their jobs and so on. Islam agrees we shouldn't be drinking this stuff because it's socially and individually destructive, and so on. So there are many overlapping things, and there are differences as well. But it's not this clear-cut thing about the Muslims or Islam on one hand and British values on the other. I think that dichotomy feeds into a certain right-wing ideology. And I would also say, in conclusion, that there are good things about Britain as Britain that I value. I'll give you an example. I was in SOAS yesterday, meeting someone, and we went and we prayed in the university in the prayer room. We prayed. Yeah. And I've done the same at Oxford University when I went there at the Department of Physics, Oxford University, a very world famous academic institution. Within that is a Muslim prayer room, and if you look at the notice board outside the uni, it says Department of Physics, Oxford University, and Muslim prayer room actually has it in the same big billboard outside. Now, why do I remark on this? Because this would never happen in France, never happen in Germany. It wouldn't happen anywhere else in Europe. And I know this because I've been told this, and I've been to some of these places. And in Germany, you could not have anywhere to pray in any public property, especially universities. It would be really clamped down upon. So Britain has, for all its faults, and there are many, everyone agrees with that, it has a degree of tolerance which many other countries in the West do not have. I mean, we welcome, for good or ill, Karl Marx sought refuge. Not Karl Marx, but he wrote Das Kapital in the British Library down the road from here. So we have a tradition of tolerance, of welcoming the stranger, the foreigner, without having to repress and exclude in the way that many Europeans countries have done with their experience of fascism, authoritarianism, and anti-religious secularism, laicite, of course, in France. So I think there is something positive to be said within limits. I'm not pretending it's all pie in the sky. It's not. Within limits about the UK. And even there are Muslims in Europe who do hijra to the UK, some Salafi brothers and sisters from France and Germany and other countries do come to the UK to practice their faith. They don't go elsewhere. They come here because there is a degree of freedom here which they've not found elsewhere in Europe. Now, I'm not trying to over-egg this, and of course you can come back and say, but, and you'd be right. But I'm just saying there is a difference, to some extent, some degree, between the two, I would argue.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think my experience of British people is that a lot of them really, if you're different and practicing your faith, if you're not doing anyone else any harm, they really aren't that bothered about it. And that's a very good trait in many of the people here. And I think that is Britain had a different way of assimilating its people from its former colonies as compared to, say, France or other European countries. Yeah. And its approach was this more gentle, softly, multicultural approach that somebody who came here as a migrant, fine, you can dress differently, you might behave differently, you might pray differently. The expectation was that you would, your family would melt in generation by generation. And I think that is something that, as I say, the Muslims buck the trend on that, but we shouldn't feel bad about that. There's nothing to be ashamed of about that. If you are here as anyone else and you choose a set of values and you behave according to them, and that those values bring you goodness and people around you goodness, why should that be a problem? Of course, it shouldn't be. And I think we spend a lot of, I think even the framing of this poll, I think one of the biggest problems I have with this poll, this story that we started with, is the framing of the questions. Why would you even ask the questions like this? Because actually, and some of the responses from this man from the Ahmadiyya sect are almost as if suggesting that we as Muslims need to do something to respond to this negative view. We need to either change or go out there and engage and change with people more. And I have no problem in going out there and engaging with people. I do that every single day. That's not whether it's online or in person. But it seems to me you're coming from this from a problematic way, which I think is, to me, that is a problem. I have confidence in this faith of Islam, this deen of Islam, such that the more of us that practice it, the more of us that live our life by those principles, the better we are as people and as communities and for everybody. And we don't need to make a song and dance about that for it to be seen by other people. I think it genuinely can be seen by other people when we live our lives in that way.
Okay, well, let's move on then finally to our last news item that we're going to focus on. Something I tweeted about, and you have as well. The BBC reports that the most popular names for children born in England and Wales in 2024 have been released, that with Mohammed topping the list of boys' names for the second year running. So what do you make of that? What's going on there?
Well, as I said when I tweeted, Paul, I think it's lovely that English people are calling their children Mohammed.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's, you know, for us, this is going to put a big smile on our face, isn't it? And for people that hate migration and that things are changing in the world, and you know, all you foreigners are coming here and all this sort of thing, they're going to hate it. But you know, who cares? we you know, Muslims love our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and feel that it's really a wonderful thing to name your son after him, and that's a very great thing, and I love that. And who would have thought it, eh? I mean, who would have thought it? That's, you know,
and the thing is, it's not just here in the UK. It's also in Europe too. In continental Europe, apparently it's the same in Holland. So this is not just a UK thing. But it's interesting. Number two, top boy's names is Noah. Of course, many people don't realize Noah is also an Islamic prophet mentioned frequently in the Quran, and he's there in Genesis because it's the same prophet. But then, curiously, on the right hand, the top female names, girls' names, are Olivia and Amelia and Lily. There's nothing there. They're very traditional kind of Anglo-Saxon names, I think. Well, Freya, I don't know Freya. I'm not, Poppy. Well, calling that girl Poppy. Can you believe it?
Yeah. Well, Olivia, of course, the olive, the zaytun, is a blessed tree in Islam. So yes, I guess the translation of that name would be Zaytuna.
Right. Okay. Well, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. What do you make of Freya? Have you heard of that name before? It sounds a bit Scandinavian to me. I don't know. I think
there's an explorer called Freya Stark who I've heard of. I don't know what the origins of that name are.
But no, it's fascinating. There's some very traditional ones. Arthur, of course, King Arthur. Leo means lion. George, lots of kings named after George. Luca, Luke, I suppose. It's another way of saying Luke. Theodore, mentioned that before. Oscar, and
God's gift.
Yeah, Archie. So they're nice names, all of them. But above all, Mohammed is a very beautiful name. And it's extraordinary. And it's a second year running as well. It's not even the first.
And it's only gonna increase, isn't it? Because we know that the birth rate in Western societies is generally quite low, and where it is being sustained is within the Muslim community. Generally, Muslims have larger families. So I think you will probably find that number one name will carry on being number one for a few years more, inshallah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's great. All right, well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for that fascinating survey of the latest news, and let's do it again, sir, if you're free.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I think it's a nice format. You know, we could go through the top 3 or 4 top news items, some very serious ones, some more lighter ones like the name issue, and that'll be a very nice thing to talk about. So inshallah, we will meet again and do it in the future. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Dr. Abdul Wahid. Until next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for having me.